The sun rises over the small village, casting golden light on the simple huts and bustling market. But in one corner of the village, where laughter and life seem to avoid, a girl sits in the shadows. Her name is Zahara. She keeps her head down, her face hidden behind a faded veil. People whisper when she walks by, their voices sharp like knives. She is cursed, they say. Bad luck follows her. No one dares to look too closely. Fear and superstition rule their minds. Her stepmother, Nyasha, makes sure the whispers never stop. With her fine clothes and golden jewelry, Nyasha stands tall, respected and admired. But behind closed doors, her heart is as cold as the stone floor Zahara sleeps on. She treats Zahara not as a daughter, but as a servant, cooking, cleaning, carrying water. Zahara does it all while Nyasha's own daughters sit comfortably, their hands never touching a single chore. At night, Zahara curls up in a small, dark hut outside the main house. No warm blanket, no soft bed, just the hard ground and the distant sound of laughter from Nyasha's daughters. Hunger gnaws at her stomach, but she dares not complain. Complaints bring punishment. Yet, in the silence of the night, she wonders, why is she the only one treated this way? Why does her stepmother hate her so much? But the answers are hidden, just like the face beneath her veil. The morning sun spills golden light over the village, waking up the sounds of life, birds chirping, women laughing as they prepare food, and children running barefoot on dusty paths. But inside one house, where wealth meets cruelty, a different kind of life unfolds. Nyasha, draped in fine fabrics and adorned with gold bangles, sits in the courtyard, sipping fresh milk from a clay cup. Her daughters lounge beside her, their hair neatly braided, their dresses spotless. They giggle as servants bring them food, warm bread, sweet mangoes, and bowls of steaming porridge. And then there is Zahara, barefoot and dressed in rags. She carries heavy pots of water from the well, her arms trembling under the weight. Beads of sweat drip down her forehead, but she doesn't stop. She knows better than to rest. Nyasha's sharp eyes never miss a mistake. "Faster, you lazy girl," Nyasha snaps. "Or do you want to eat dirt for breakfast?" Zahara lowers her head and hurries. She is always hurrying, cleaning the house, washing clothes, cooking meals, but none of it is ever enough. Nyasha's daughters never lift a finger, yet they are treated like princesses. Zahara, on the other hand, is treated worse than the servants. She doesn't go to school. While other children scribble on slates and learn to count, Zahara is bent over a pile of firewood, her hands covered in splinters. When she hears them talking about their lessons, a strange longing fills her heart. But Nyasha has made it clear, education is not for her. "You are too stupid to learn," Nyasha sneers whenever she catches Zahara watching the village children read. "Your place is in the kitchen, not in a classroom." And so, Zahara remains trapped in her world of endless chores. At mealtime, she watches as Nyasha and her daughters feast on roasted meat, fresh vegetables, and soft bread. She waits silently, hoping for leftovers. Some nights, they don't leave her anything at all. Her stomach growls in protest, but she has learned to silence it. Then comes the worst part of the day, nightfall. While Nyasha's daughters sleep on thick, soft mattresses in a warm room filled with colorful fabrics, Zahara shivers in a cold hut outside the house. The roof leaks when it rains, and the wind sneaks in through the cracks in the wooden walls. She curls up on the hard floor, wrapping herself in a thin cloth, pretending it's a blanket. The villagers see her suffering, but no one steps in. They only whisper. "She is the ugly one," they say. "The cursed child." Their words hurt, but Zahara never fights back. What would be the point? No one listens to the words of a girl like her. No one, except for one person. Nana Kofi, the village healer, is the only one who speaks to Zahara with kindness. With her grey hair wrapped in a headscarf and her wise eyes filled with warmth, she sees what others do not. One evening, as Zahara sits by the river, her feet dipped in the cool water, Nana Kofi approaches. She carries a small bundle wrapped in cloth and hands it to Zahara. Inside is a piece of warm bread, still fresh. Zahara's eyes widen, her hands trembling as she holds the food. "Eat, child," Nana Kofi says gently. Tears prick Zahara's eyes. She hasn't eaten all day. She takes small bites, savoring the taste, her hunger momentarily forgotten. "You are more than what they see," Nana Kofi whispers, her voice soft but firm. "One day, they will know the truth." Zahara looks up, confused. What truth? But Nana Kofi only smiles, as if she knows something Zahara does not. That night, as Zahara lies awake in her cold hut, she holds on to Nana Kofi's words. For the first time in a long while, hope flickers inside her. She does not understand it yet, but deep inside, something is changing. Zahara grew up in silence, moving like a shadow in her own home. She did not laugh like other girls, nor did she dream like them. She had learned from an early age that dreaming was dangerous. Nyasha made sure of that. From the moment Zahara could walk, Nyasha reminded her that she was nothing. "You are lucky I even let you stay here," she would sneer. "No one wants a girl like you." The words stuck to Zahara like thorns. She never questioned them, never fought back. Instead, she shrank into herself, doing everything she was told, hoping that one day, if she worked hard enough, Nyasha would finally look at her with kindness. That day never came. Nyasha's own daughters wore beautiful dresses, their hair always neatly braided. Zahara, on the other hand, was given old, worn-out clothes, sometimes even her stepmother's discarded rags. The village children would point and laugh as she walked past, whispering cruel words. "She is cursed. She is the ugly one. She should cover her face." And so, Zahara did. She started pulling her veil lower, hiding the scar that ran across her cheek. She never asked how it got there. She never dared. Nyasha was careful about many things. One of them was making sure Zahara never saw her own reflection. There were no mirrors in the house, at least not where Zahara could find them. Even in the market, if she passed by a polished metal surface, Nyasha would pull her away before she could catch a glimpse of herself. "You don't need to see," Nyasha would say sharply. "What good would it do?" For a long time, Zahara believed her. She thought there was nothing worth looking at, but something didn't feel right. One day, while running errands in the market, Zahara noticed something strange. The traders, the ones who usually ignored her, were staring, not with disgust, not with pity, but with something else. Confusion, curiosity. An old woman selling fabrics squinted at her as she walked by. A man who sold spices paused in his work, his eyes following her carefully. Even the fruit seller, who never had time for gossip, stared for a moment too long. Zahara lowered her head and hurried away, but the feeling stayed with her. Why were they looking at her like that? The answer came when she least expected it. One afternoon, a stranger arrived in the village. He was tall, dressed in fine clothes, and his eyes scanned the village as if searching for something. Then his gaze landed on Zahara. He froze. For a moment, Zahara thought she had imagined it. But then, the man's expression changed. Shock, recognition. He took a step forward. "You," he began. Before he could finish, Nyasha appeared out of nowhere. Her face twisted in fury. She grabbed Zahara's arm, pulling her back. "She is no one," Nyasha snapped. "Just a worthless girl. Leave her alone." The man hesitated, his eyes flickering between Zahara and Nyasha. He opened his mouth to speak again, but Nyasha's grip tightened. "Go," she hissed. And just like that, the moment was gone. The stranger, after one last lingering look, turned and walked away. Nyasha dragged Zahara back home, her nails digging into her skin. She said nothing, but her anger burned hotter than the midday sun. That night, Zahara lay awake in her cold hut, staring at the ceiling. Who was that man? Why did he look at her like that? And why did Nyasha seem so afraid? For the first time in her life, Zahara felt something new, a question, a spark of doubt. And once a spark is lit, it is only a matter of time before it becomes a fire. Zahara sat beside Nana Kofi, listening to the old woman's steady breathing. The night was quiet. The only sound was the distant hoot of an owl. The warm glow of the fire flickered across Nana Kofi's wrinkled face, making her look older, wiser, like a woman carrying the weight of 1,000 untold secrets. Zahara had spent her life believing she was worthless, unwanted. But that day in the market, the stranger's reaction, the way people stared at her, it had shaken something inside her. A feeling she couldn't explain. A whisper that told her there was something she didn't know. Nana Kofi reached out, taking Zahara's hands in hers. Her grip was weak, but her voice was strong. "My child," she said softly, "it is time you know the truth." Zahara's heart pounded. "Your mother," Nana Kofi continued, "was no ordinary woman. She was Princess Adana of the great kingdom beyond the mountains, the first daughter of King Kwame, a ruler feared and respected by all." Zahara blinked in confusion. A princess? It sounded like a fairy tale. She shook her head. "No, that can't be." Nana Kofi smiled sadly. "You do not remember, but you were born in the palace surrounded by gold and silk. Your mother adored you. She named you Zahara, the shining flower, but your life was never meant to be peaceful." Zahara listened, her breath shallow. "Your mother died under mysterious circumstances," Nana Kofi said, lowering her voice. "Some say she fell ill, others whisper that she was poisoned. But one thing was certain. Someone wanted her gone. Zahara felt a chill crawl down her spine. Nana Kofi continued, "Your father, the king, was heartbroken. But before he could secure your place in the royal family, you were taken from the palace, stolen in the dead of night." Zahara gasped. "By who?" Nana Kofi's eyes darkened. Nyasha, the name felt like poison on her tongue. She was once a mere servant, but she had ambitions greater than her station. She took you, hid you in this village, and spread lies about you being cursed, ugly, unwanted, all so no one would ever question where you truly belonged. Zahara shook her head violently. "No, that's not possible. Why would she do that?" "Power," Nana Kofi whispered. "With you gone, there was no threat to the ones she favored. She kept you in the shadows so you would never rise, never challenge her daughters for what is rightfully yours." Zahara's hands trembled. All her life, she had believed she was nothing, but now she realized she had been someone important all along. She swallowed hard. "My scar," Nana Kofi sighed deeply. "It is the mark from the night you were stolen. They tried to end you before you could grow, before you could become a threat, but fate was on your side. You survived." Zahara traced the scar on her cheek with shaky fingers. For years, it had been a source of shame. Now, she saw it for what it truly was, a reminder that she had lived through something meant to destroy her. Her entire life had been a lie. Zahara's eyes burned with unshed tears, but she did not cry. She could not. She had spent too many years being silent, being weak, but not anymore. She looked into Nana Kofi's eyes, her voice steady. "I want to go back." The old woman nodded knowingly. "Then go, child. Take back what is yours." And for the first time in her life, Zahara felt something powerful stir inside her. A fire that had been waiting to burn. The night was dark, and the village was silent. Zahara stood near the edge of the forest, her heart pounding like a drum. She had never left the village alone before. Fear whispered in her ears, telling her to turn back, but Nana Kofi's words echoed louder in her mind. "Take back what is yours." Zahara tightened the small bag she carried over her shoulder. Inside was nothing but a few pieces of dry bread and a flask of water. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. Her bare feet trembled against the cold earth, but she did not hesitate. She took a deep breath and ran. The trees stood tall around her, their twisted shadows stretching across the moonlit path. The wind howled, and every rustling leaf made her flinch, but she did not stop. She ran faster, her breath sharp, her legs burning. She was leaving behind the life of a servant, a girl mocked and hidden. She was running toward her true destiny. By the time the sun rose, Zahara had reached the main road leading to the capital. The sight of it filled her with both excitement and fear. She had only heard stories of the great city, its tall buildings, golden gates, and streets filled with people. But as she took her first step forward, she heard something that made her blood run cold. Hoofbeats. Someone was coming. Fast. She turned and saw them. Nyasha's men. They were on horseback, their eyes scanning the road. Nyasha must have realized she was missing. Panic surged through Zahara's veins. If they caught her, she would never escape again. She darted off the road, running toward the tall grass on the other side. The blades scratched her skin, but she didn't care. She had to get away. She crouched low, holding her breath as the riders passed by, their eyes searching the road ahead. Minutes felt like hours, but finally, the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance. Zahara let out a shaky breath and continued her journey. She walked for days, her feet blistered, her body weak with hunger, but she never stopped. She begged for food in small villages, traded simple tasks for water, and slept under the open sky. When she finally saw the capital in the distance, she almost fell to her knees in relief. The city was more magnificent than she had imagined. Towering walls surrounded it, with grand gates guarded by soldiers in gleaming armor. The streets were alive with people, merchants selling goods, children running, music filling the air. Zahara's heart pounded as she made her way toward the palace. She could feel eyes on her, people staring at her tattered clothes, her dirty face, her scar. She ignored them. She had not come for their approval. At the palace gates, 2 guards stood tall, their spears crossed in front of the entrance. "I need to see the king," Zahara said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. The guards looked her up and down and laughed. "And who are you?" one of them mocked. "A lost beggar." Zahara clenched her fists. "I am Zahara, daughter of Princess Adana. I have come to claim what is mine." The laughter stopped. The guards exchanged glances, but then one of them shook his head. "Go away. The palace is not for people like you." Zahara's heart sank. She had come all this way. She couldn't be turned away now. Then, A voice rose from behind the guards. "Wait!" An elderly man, dressed in royal robes, stepped forward, his eyes, deep and knowing, locked onto Zahara's face. But he wasn't looking at her eyes or her torn clothes. He was looking at her scar. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in a voice filled with shock and recognition, he whispered, "It's her." Zahara stood frozen as the palace gates opened for her. She had spent her whole life as a shadow, a girl hidden away, mocked, and treated like nothing. But now, the whispers around her were different. The guards who had once laughed at her now bowed their heads in respect. Servants rushed to her side, guiding her through the grand halls of the palace. The moment she stepped inside, everything felt unreal. The marble floors gleamed beneath her bare feet, chandeliers sparkled like stars above her, and golden tapestries lined the walls, telling the stories of past rulers. Her heart pounded. Was she truly meant to be here? Then, the moment of truth arrived. The elder who had recognized her scar led her into a private chamber where the king himself awaited. He was tall, with a presence so powerful it made Zahara feel small. His eyes, deep and wise, studied her. There was something in them, a mix of shock, pain, and hope. A royal physician stepped forward, holding a small device. "We must be sure," he said gently. Zahara nodded, though her hands trembled. A tiny sample of her blood was taken, and for the next hour she waited in silence, her heart racing with every second. Then the physician returned. His hands shook as he held the results. His voice, barely above a whisper, carried words that changed Zahara's life forever. "She is of royal blood. She is the lost princess." Gasps filled the room. The king stood up so quickly that his chair scraped against the floor. His eyes glistened with unshed tears. "My daughter's child," he murmured. "She lives." Zahara could barely breathe. It was true. She was not just a servant, not just the girl everyone called ugly. She was royalty. The king turned to his attendants. "Prepare everything. She must be restored to her rightful place." Within minutes, Zahara was whisked away. First, she was taken to the royal baths, where warm water infused with scented oils washed away the dirt of her old life. The servants scrubbed gently, treating her with care, whispering in awe about how fate had hidden a princess in the form of a servant. Her hair, once tangled and unkempt, was washed until it shone like midnight silk. Her skin, rough from years of mistreatment, was gently soothed with oils and creams. The scar on her face, the one she had always believed made her ugly, was now seen as a mark of survival, proof that she was meant for something greater. Then came the transformation. A royal seamstress arrived with garments finer than anything Zahara had ever touched. Soft silks, embroidered with gold, wrapped around her body. A delicate necklace, once belonging to her mother, was placed around her neck. Her feet, which had known only the feel of rough earth, were now adorned with golden sandals. When they brought her before a mirror, Zahara hesitated. She had never seen herself properly before. Nyasha had always kept mirrors away, afraid that one day Zahara would discover the truth. Slowly, she lifted her gaze. The reflection staring back at her was not the girl she had grown up believing she was. Gone was the weak, frightened servant girl. In her place stood a woman of grace and power. Her scar no longer defined her. Instead, it only made her more striking. She was regal, strong, untouchable, a princess. The kingdom erupted with celebration. News of her return spread like wildfire. People filled the streets, singing, dancing, and rejoicing. The lost princess had been found, and justice had finally begun to take shape. But while the people celebrated, one person trembled in fear: Nyasha. For years she had buried the truth, believing she had erased Zahara's destiny. But now, the girl she had tormented, the one she had tried to hide, had risen from the ashes, and she was coming home. The drums of the royal palace thundered across the land, carrying a message that shook the entire nation. The lost princess had returned. The child stolen years ago, hidden away in disgrace, had risen from the shadows. The streets of the capital were alive with celebration, but Zahara had one final journey to make, back to the village that had rejected her. She sat tall in a royal carriage, dressed in the finest silk, adorned with golden jewels that shimmered under the sun. Her once scarred and dirty face now radiated strength. She no longer hid behind a veil. She had no reason to. As the royal procession approached the village, dust rose in the air, and the sound of hooves against the dry earth sent villagers rushing to the roadside. They watched, wide-eyed, unable to believe what they saw. The girl they had mocked, the one they had treated like dirt, was now surrounded by royal guards. She rode in a golden carriage, fit for a queen. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Is that Zahara? It cannot be. She was nothing. She was ugly. Look at her now. She is beautiful." Regret filled their eyes, but it was too late. The carriage stopped in the center of the village. Silence fell as Zahara stepped out, her presence commanding every gaze. The very people who had once laughed at her now bowed their heads, too ashamed to meet her eyes. And then, from the crowd, Nyasha emerged. Her once proud posture was gone. The arrogance, the cruelty, it had all crumbled into desperation. She fell to her knees before Zahara, her face pale with fear. "My princess," she whimpered, her voice trembling. "Forgive me. I did not know. I was foolish. But Zahara did not need to hear her lies. She did not need her tears. She simply smiled, not out of kindness, not out of anger, but with the quiet grace of someone who had already won. Then, without a single word, she turned and walked past Nyasha, her steps steady, her head held high. A true queen does not seek revenge. She lets justice take its course, and justice had finally arrived. Nyasha stood frozen as the royal guards surrounded her. The woman who once ruled the village with arrogance now looked small, trembling before the king's messengers. The crowd watched in silence, waiting for the judgment they all knew was coming. A royal decree had been sent from the palace. The king had made his decision. Nyasha was to be banished. Stripped of her wealth, her fine clothes, and her status, she was nothing now. Tears filled her eyes as she looked around, searching for sympathy, for mercy, but there was none. The same villagers who once bowed to her now turned their backs. Not a single person met her gaze. She had ruled with cruelty, and now she was reaping what she had sown. "But I was only protecting her," she cried, her voice desperate, cracking with fear. I was afraid. I didn't know." The guards did not care for her excuses. They grabbed her arms, dragging her toward the village gates. She screamed, struggling, but no one moved to help her. She had spent years ensuring Zahara remained invisible, unwanted. Now, she was the one who had become nothing. As she stepped past the boundary of the village, she turned one last time, hoping for someone, anyone, to stop this. But all she saw was Zahara. The girl she had beaten, insulted, and locked away was no longer a servant. She stood tall, regal, dressed in royal robes, her crown shimmering in the sunlight. The villagers who once mocked her now bowed in respect. She had won, not with revenge, not with hatred, but with destiny. Nyasha's lip trembled as she realized the truth. The ugly girl she had hidden away had always been a swan, and she had been nothing more than a shadow, desperate to hold on to a power that was never hers. The gates closed behind her. No one looked back. Meanwhile, Zahara stepped forward, her throne waiting. She did not need to say anything. Her very presence was proof enough. The girl no one wanted had become the queen the world needed, and justice, as always, had found its way home. True beauty cannot be hidden forever. Evil may win for a while, but justice always finds its way. Every ugly duckling has the potential to be a swan. If you like this story and believe that true beauty and strength can't be hidden forever, make sure to hit like, share it with others, and subscribe for more inspiring tales. Stay tuned for the next chapter of Courage and Destiny.